All right, well, obviously we are about halfway through the high school football season, but this week it is all about college football in this episode because after two tumultuous weekends, Oklahoma has a chance to really gain some momentum back as they take on their arch rival Texas at the Cotton Bowl, and I will be there, and also there will be Joe Buettner from the Norman Transcript who joins me for the second time on this podcast. Joe, I'm glad I didn't scare you off the first time, and thanks again for being a part of this.
No problem, man. Anytime. It was a lot of fun. No scaring off, and appreciate you having me back.
As we mentioned before we started recording, you were obviously not only at the game in Norman against Kansas State, but you were up at Ames this past weekend, and I think a lot of us, we're curious as to how Oklahoma would respond to the loss. Again, last year they lost to K-State, and then 2 weeks later played Iowa State, nearly gave up a 21-point lead. And this time, it was a very, very close game, and OU again ends up on the short end of it, loses 2 straight games. And from your perspective, having been there at the stadium, I know everybody is riling on the defense, but I mean, what were some of the things that you saw that are most concerning if you're an OU fan?
Well, I think it's not just the defense, that's for sure. I think that the missed tackles are pretty alarming, and you had some good spurts with the defense, but you also had a lot of opportunities to get takeaways that just never materialized. Patrick Fields had 3 pass breakups. Brendan Radley-Hiles had a pass breakup. I feel like about three of those could have been interceptions, and that changes the entire trajectory of the game. But as far as like the offense goes, they have some major issues on that offensive line, and the running backs, you can, I guess you can point to, you have inexperienced running backs, but I think a lot of the struggles that they're having is because the offensive line isn't getting much push up front. And then, as much as it feels weird to, I guess, like defend him in such a way, but like Spencer Rattler, for example, like, he's thrown the interceptions that have ended the game against Kansas State and Iowa State. But, I mean, he's looked phenomenal otherwise. And, he's had some issues, I think, with building chemistry with his receivers who just are dropping a lot of really good passes, in my opinion. But Spencer Rattler is just kind of around him as a very inexperienced team, and he's inexperienced himself. And I think probably that last play, you can chalk it up a little bit to, Rattler maybe trying to do too much in that moment when there's still a lot of time left. But at the same time, there's just so many situations that you can put themselves in that don't lead to them losing back-to-back weeks against teams they frankly shouldn't lose to, which sounds a little arrogant. Probably, if you're not an OU fan, it probably sounds like, you're not entitled to anything. But this is a talented OU team, and they're underachieving in just a way that we really haven't seen since 2014.
Yeah, that was something that somebody was asking me not too long ago. Was, I think, during that Iowa State game, or maybe right after. Somebody asked a trivia question to me when was the last time that OU lost back-to-back games, and I was trying to rack my brain. And I know that 2009 Sam Bradford goes down, and that season kind of was up and down from there. But I mean, this isn't. You didn't have any serious major injuries so far. I know you can. Some people might point to. I mean, quite frankly, Ronnie Perkins hasn't played at all, so you can't compare, what they've been like with him in over 10 months. And so the defense, like you said, it is alarming that they are missing tackles and missing opportunities. Alex Grinch is somebody who's long really emphasized the takeaway and emphasized the aggressiveness, and you wonder sometimes what the negative byproducts of that might be. And I'm not saying that necessarily they're being too aggressive, but it's just, it's definitely been different, to say the least. They go up against a Texas defense that just got done allowing TCU to, frankly, run kind of rush shot over them. You mentioned the you mentioned the inexperience at running back, and you know they had quite the offseason when you consider that Trey Sermon leaves, and TJ Pledger, who has been in the program for a while but hadn't always been on the field, and then Seth McGowan as a freshman kind of being thrown in the fire. What expectations do you think are realistic for this running game going up against Texas? Do you think that's kind of the main game plan, or do you think that, much like in the past few years, they aim to kind of spread it out?
I think that you don't really have much of an option but to try to run the ball. This is a game that is very physical, just in its nature. It's a heated rivalry game that always seems to just bring out, one team. One team I feel usually just comes out as the aggressor. OU wants to win; they have to run the ball. I do think that there is a chance for this game to, become a shootout, and we see another kind of 2018 version of this game where there's just not a lot of defense and both offenses are kind of just, putting up a lot of points super quickly. But OU needs to run the ball, and I don't think it's unrealistic for them to figure it out because OU has had this hasn't been a new issue for Oklahoma's offensive line. It's weird that it's happening this year because they returned all of their starters from last season, but they have been in this position before where they have come out of the gates looking like a team that is going through some early season growing pains, and they tend to figure it out. And a lot of that you probably could attribute to the fact that they only had one non-conference game before Big 12 play started, and have Kansas State and Iowa State as your first two Big 12 games, two of probably the most physical teams in the Big 12, aside from like a Baylor. That's just a hard test for an offensive line that's obviously struggling to mesh, and it's weird because of their experience. But I mean, if there's an assistant coach under Riley that you can probably trust that's going to get this corrected, it's Bill Bedenbaugh and that offensive line. I think that they have to establish the run. Otherwise, you are putting yourself in a very bad position because I think, as you saw against Iowa State and Kansas State, those secondaries were dropping back, 7 or 8, and they were just kind of, saying, Spencer Rattler, try and beat us because we're not going to let you throw the ball. And so it becomes a game where, you hope that Seth McGowan doesn't make freshman-like mistakes where he, tried to reverse field against Iowa State. One time, it's just like you've got certain things that you need those guys to better understand, especially just like the vision and, trying not to do too much. And a lot of that comes down to just in-game reps, and they haven't had a lot of those, but if they can get that going early against Texas, that's going to serve them super well. I don't think it should be an unrealistic expectation as good as OU is at running the ball. And who knows, maybe we get a Lincoln Riley wrinkle we haven't seen yet this season. So it's going to be interesting to see what those guys can do. I would hope that Seth McGowan probably gets more run. I just don't think TJ Pledger has been it. And then Marcus Major is kind of a non-factor at this point. But they desperately need a guy like Ramondre Stevenson back from suspension, but they're not going to get that this weekend. So it just kind of comes down to what Seth McGowan and TJ Pledger can do, and if this offensive line can take another step.
Yeah, you bring that up. Ramondre Stevenson is a guy who, prior to last season, I was not very familiar with, and he really was kind of an X factor on that offense and played such a major role. And all credit to, like you mentioned, Bill Bedenbaugh is one of the better O-line coaches in the nation. I'm not just saying that because he's, quite frankly, one of the few O-line coaches whose name I actually know, but because, I mean, the results have spoken for themselves over the past few years, and obviously when you get very talented guys, like Cody Ford, like Bobby Evans, I mean, that's gonna that's going to pay dividends. I mean, they had 4 guys off that one offensive line go in the draft, and then Creed Humphrey is an All-American candidate, but Creed can't do it all himself, and you saw him get hurt for a little bit in that K-State game, and very next play they don't get enough push on a 4th down, and it's definitely one of those things where when people think about the running game, they look at the running backs, but obviously the O-line has not been what it's been in the past. You mentioned wanting to control the ball on the ground, and I mean, they definitely kind of had the recipe. I mean, when you look at what TCU did against Texas, they had the ball for, I guess, 34 of the almost 35 of the 60 minutes, and OU kind of did the same thing. They had it for 33 and a half minutes against Iowa State. It's just a matter of quality over quantity. What are you able to do with those carries, with those reps? You mentioned how fierce of physical rivalry this is. Now, you grew up, in Oklahoma, correct? And you grew up watching this rivalry. What was kind of your first sense of this rivalry kind of growing up? Do you have a specific memory that kind of jumps out of you kind of remembering, okay, that's who we're supposed to not like, and that's how this game is going to be played?
To be frank, the memory that jumps out, and I think the first OU Texas game I ever went to was like 2005, when OU just got completely smacked by Vince Young, Texas Longhorns, en route to a national championship. My first real encounter with like OU Texas was that trip. But like, I have a memory of going to an OU basketball game, not football, basketball, in Norman, and I just remember like this group of Longhorn fans that were just in the nosebleeds where we were, and just like they were throwing popcorn, throwing their drinks, like just completely like I don't think at that time, when I was like, I must have been like 8 or 9, I didn't really understand, but I was like, wow, these guys really don't like OU at all. And that's when it kind of set in for me. And as I've gotten older, like I understand, like, how heated this rivalry is. And both fan bases really hate each other's team. But I'm actually working on a story right now about OU fans going down to the game for OU Texas, which there's quite a few apparently. There's going to be, I believe, 12,500 OU fans, and the same for Texas. And I asked the question I keep asking everyone that I've talked to for the story is like, what are you going to miss the most? And every one of them says the trash talk, just like the banter between Texas. I was like, and I thought that was interesting. I was like, I guess that does kind of make the atmosphere so unique, is that it's 50-50. You're not going to someone else's home. Like you were all congregating midway, at the midway point between both universities. And kind of in a weird way, I feel like OU and Texas fans, as much as they hate each other's school, they kind of need each other to make this rivalry work. As far as, I mean, like, if either fan base didn't have each other to like be disrespectful toward, then it's not really as fun, I guess. But it's a fun game. I'm upset that there's not going to be any fair food, and I'm excited at least that Fletcher's Corny Dogs will be at the state fair, and I hope to achieve at least 10 corny dogs by kickoff. That is my soft goal. A soft goal.
I don't think I can hit 10. I don't know if I can do that.
I don't know if it'll actually be 10, but
right.
Yeah, no, I do plan on at 9 a.m. getting a Fletcher's Corny Dog and lemonade. So especially if I don't have to get coupons.
Oh yeah.
I didn't
think about that, because last year I got to the game, and with it being my first time there, I wanted to really soak in the atmosphere. After last year's game, I got there early, didn't get a corn dog, planned on getting one after the game, and was so just beat to death because I had driven whatever I'd gotten to Dallas, I think at like 3 a.m, and it was just one of those things where like I'm going to go home and not worry about tickets or the tokens or whatever it is. But it's going to be a really interesting game. I think both teams obviously are extremely desperate at this point. These are both teams that had not just Big 12 title, but college football playoff dreams. And quite frankly, I mean, not only are those most likely gone, but I mean, if maybe not necessarily fairly, uh, I don't think necessarily in the case of Lincoln Riley, but you know, for the losing team this weekend, do you think some seats become more hot, whether it's a head coach or maybe some assistants?
Um, I think that if OU loses, there's probably a 1% chance that anyone gets fired. I do think if Texas loses this game, Tom Herman has had a pretty poor track record since arriving to Austin. If there's anything that you can say about Lincoln Riley, it's that since he's taken over, they've been kind of the model for success, and especially in the Big 12. I mean, they haven't done it in the playoffs, but I mean, Lincoln Riley, as my colleague Clay Horning, who's the columnist here at the Transcript, I mean, he's entitled to an off season. He's, or I guess, entitled to a down year, which I think is what OU's headed toward. And that's, I mean, that's still probably like 5-5, 6-4, or something like that, which I know kind of sounds crazy around OU, but like, I think after the last 3 years, he's somewhat earned that. Not earned it in that you want him to do that, but he's fine. Now, you know, if this was a recurring theme over the next 2 or 3 seasons, then yeah, the seat gets hot. I think Tom Herman's probably still okay if Texas loses, but like that's the program that I think, and they just hired a bunch of new coordinators and assistants, but like that's the guy that's probably more desperate, I think, in this game. I think Lincoln Riley is too. Like starting the season 1-3 would be, coming back to Norman on Sunday, like would be. I'm not sure that Norman would still exist. Coming up, I would be a little skeptical that entire drive, thinking like, well, maybe it's still there. It might not be. Uh, but they both teams, like you said, desperate. Both really need a win. I'm not really sure who needs it more, but as far as like a head coach that can't afford too many more disappointing seasons, definitely Tom Herman. Lincoln Riley's not quite there yet.
No, I tend to agree with you. And I don't think Lincoln's in too much trouble. I just, and again, I've long said that I've long stayed off message boards for a long time, saying that they were just a haven for the insane. And quite frankly, I'm now beginning to realize that I've been on a message board the whole time. It's called Twitter. It's just all the same dribble that you hear. Some people have, and I'm sure you saw it too. And again, you don't know what some of these people's relationships to the school are, and you're always going to find some crazies in each fan base. But yeah, I mean, after Saturday night's game, you saw some people saying, a few more bad performances, or at the end of this year, if things don't get better, why do we even have Alex Grinch? And the fact of the matter is, yeah, you're projecting at that point. We don't know what the rest of the season is going to look like. And you mentioned, if they go 5-5, 6-4, I might be in the minority. I still think, if they are able to right the ship, if things go very well this weekend, I mean, they could still very well be going into Bedlam with a chance to I mean, they could still very well play for a Big 12 title. I know that the odds aren't super high, aren't super great, but I mean, this is still such, like you said, such a talented team, and I think that's what's so frustrating if you're watching it through crimson lenses. Is this wasn't supposed to happen. Yeah, it's probably permissible to a certain extent, like you said. You don't want it to happen, but Lincoln, you trust the process enough that, and you trust the recruiting class they've got coming in, that you're thinking, okay, things are going to get better. That but it is something where, I mean, you think back, like you said, 2014 is probably the last time that we saw anything like this, and it's going to be really interesting. Now, I don't know. I'm sure you'll probably have something in the paper, but do you want to go ahead? What is the official Joe Buettner prediction for this weekend?
I've been asked this a few times, and I still really haven't made a pick. But um, I think that what I'm leaning toward is like, this is gonna sound crazy. So it, when you hear this, just know, just I'll preface it by saying, based on how I'm thinking, probably hammer the under. But I could see this game being a 10-point win for OU. I know that sounds weird, but I guess the score I had in mind was like 51-41, which made me think like the reason I think it's going to be high scoring is because I don't think either defense can stop the other. Um, but I think OU can make enough plays to where the offense finally settles in because eventually they have to. I mean, I have too much trust in what Lincoln Riley does as a play caller and as an offensive mind, like that they're eventually going to get it figured out. And it might not be this weekend, but this is the type of game where I think Oklahoma can, kind of flex a little bit and, say like, the last 2 weeks were more aberrations and like this is more who we are as a football team. And, I could see it really going OU's way in the end. But as much as I think it's going to be high scoring, it also makes me think like, well, maybe like the more I think it's going to be high scoring, the more I'm just like, just watch Saturday just be like 21-17 or something like that, something stupid like that. So that's a 51-41 OU, which feels strange, but I do think that Texas has, as much as I think we living in this OU bubble, uh, you know, think that Oklahoma has a lot of issues. There is probably not enough said about the issues that Texas has as a defense. There's really not many areas where I think that Texas is far and ahead better than Oklahoma. Like, I mean, Sam Ehlinger is a really good quarterback, but I think that Spencer Rattler, from a talent perspective, will eventually surpass Sam Ehlinger. It might not be this weekend. I mean, having a veteran quarterback is what you want in this type of football game, but I'm not really sure. It kind of feels like two teams that have really good leaders at quarterback that don't have a lot of talent around them. And it's just going to come down to which group or which quarterback can kind of corral their group best and, put together a win. And I think that that's OU this weekend, but wouldn't be shocked if Texas wins this game. But I'll go with 51-41 to answer your question in a very long and roundabout way.
Well, there it is. I can already hear all of my 5 viewers heading to Vegas with their betting tickets, hammering the. I think according to ESPN.com and their lines, I think currently I believe the over/unders around 72, about a 2.5-point favorite. OU is. It's going to be interesting, and I don't disagree with you. I think it could absolutely be a shootout. Again, a couple years ago, maybe it would have, I don't know. I think a couple years ago it was a bit shocking to see Texas do that to that OU defense. It wouldn't be shocking for me to see either defense really kind of get carved up a little bit this weekend. But we will see on Saturday. He will be there. He's Joe Buettner. I will be there. I'm your host, Glenn Brockenbush. Do we have word on whether Cardboard Tyler Palmatier will be there?
Cardboard Tyler Palmatier will be in Dallas by all accounts. Still has to pass a COVID test on Friday, but we expect good results.
That's good to hear. Hopefully they got plenty of coffee for him there in the press box. All right. Well, Joe, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And for SpOKen Freely, I'm Glenn Brockenbush. Thank you.
Audio Jungle.